Hey guys, welcome to another Warframe video, and today we're gonna take a look at all the bows that were buffed or in any way changed with update 22.12. Quick note before we start though, this is gonna be more of a top end test, and the way we're gonna do it is we're gonna take these bows into the simulacrum and put them up against some of the toughest units from each faction at level 100, because that's what the vast majority of the player base, including myself, considers to be top end. Also, I'm not going to be swapping my elemental combos around for each faction, so what you're gonna see is the effectiveness of corrosive and most likely heat. And let's start it off with bow number 1, the Paris, and all that changed here is its mastery requirement was increased from 0 to 3 and its charge speed has been increased from 1 second to 0.5 seconds. The increased charge rate here is definitely nice because you'd no longer have to run a fire rate mod for the bow to feel good, so you can just focus on modding for damage. The reason, by the way, why we're testing this one on lower level enemies is because I don't have a full build for the Paris, and I don't think most people do, because you can get better bows fairly early on. So I'm pretty sure that most people will have a better bow by the time they finish the star chart. But if you do want to max it out anyway, you want to build it the same way you would build the Paris Prime, so a crit build with 90% elementals. In at number 2 we have the Dread, which has seen similar changes to the Paris, so it had its mastery requirement bumped up from 0 to 5, and it had its charge speed increased from 1 second to 0.5 seconds. The mastery rank change is fairly inconsequential because I can't imagine too many people actually get their hands on the Dread before mastery rank 5, since you do have to farm it from the Stalker, and the charge speed increase is once again really nice because you don't have to go for a fire rate mod and you can focus on full damage. Which also means the build stays pretty much the same. You want to go for a crit build with 90% elementals. The difference here is that you no longer have to use a fire rate mod, so you can put in one extra damage mod instead. Then at number 3 we have the Cernos, so the mastery rank requirement has been bumped up from 0 to 6, the charge shot damage went from 200 to 220, they increased the charge speed from 1 second to 0.5 seconds, then they buffed the status chance from 10% to 18%, and finally the crit chance went from 35% to 36%. And once again, we're fighting star chart level enemies because I don't have a full build on the Cernos. I have 3 other Cernos bows that I've already fully formatted up, so I didn't really see a point in it. Luckily though, you want to build it the same way you would build a Rakta Cernos, which I do have a full build on, so you want to go for a full-on crit build with 90% elementals. I like these changes overall because it turns the Cernos from this bow you are most likely going to ignore to something that's actually really nice to get if you can't get the Dread. Then at number 4 we have the Mutalist version of the Cernos, and this is one of those weapons where swapping your elemental combos around is actually a pretty big deal, so I'm going to be using Corrosive and Heat for the Infested and Grenier, and Gas with Electricity for the Corpus. And the changes here are that its mastery requirement went from 5 to 7, they increased the charge speed from 1 second to 0.5 seconds, and they increased the status chance from 45% to 49%. The biggest change here is once again the charge speed increase, which allows you to forego a fire rate mod for more damage. I would say this is even better on the Cernos than on the other bows, because every time you fire an arrow, a toxic cloud will appear which will do a little bit of damage and proc status, which means you can now stack these clouds much faster, which leads to faster armor stripping, more crowd control, or even more damage. And the status chance increase is actually pretty nice as well, because you can now easily go for a 90% elemental and still hit 100% status. And as far as the build is concerned, I'm going for a hybrid, so I have Point Strike and Vital Sense for crit, 2 dual stat mods, 190% elemental, and then Split Chamber with Vigilante armaments for a ton of multi-shot. Then at number 5 we have the primed version of the Paris, which has had its mastery requirement bumped up from 4 to 8, its charge shot damage increased from 200 to 260, and once again the charge speed increased from 1 second to 0.5 seconds. This is a pretty serious buff right here, because once again the charge speed increase means that you don't have to use a fire rate mod and can build for pure damage instead, and it now does 60 more damage per shot than the Dread. Now it is mostly puncture based, so it's not going to be amazing versus flesh or shields, but it's really good versus armor. And the build here stays pretty much the same. You want to go for a crit build with 90% elementals. The only difference now is that you don't have to use a fire rate mod anymore. Then at number 6 we have the Daiku, which has received quite a few changes as well. So first up, it's been given a mastery rank requirement of 10 rather than having none whatsoever. Then they tweaked the damage distribution of the bow, so instead of having 20% impact, 60% puncture and 20% slash, it now has 30% impact, only 40% puncture and 30% slash. Then they once again increased the charge speed, so instead of having 1.75 seconds, it now has 1 second. And the charge can also be held indefinitely now, which is a very nice quality of life change. And finally, to kind of balance out the faster fire rate of the bow, they reduced the damage per shot from 500 to 460. This is ultimately a pretty big buff though, because they only shaved off 40 damage and you can fire almost twice as fast now. Now while the mastery rank change is pretty harsh, I think the changes overall are really good. They make the Daiku far more usable and I think more people will pick it up now. And as far as the build is concerned, I went for sort of hybrid light, so I have Point Strike and Vital Sense for crit, one dual stat mod for status, and the rest is full on damage. And finally at number 7 we have the primed version of the Cernos, which out of all the bows has probably changed the most. So it has had its mastery requirement bumped up from 8 to 12, they increased the charge speed from 1 second to 0.5 seconds, and they also increased the status chance from 10% up to 30%. Then they increased the reload speed of the bow from 1 second to 0.65 seconds, and by the way, the reload speed on a bow is the speed at which you will take the arrows out of the quiver once you fire it. And the reason why they changed it here and not on the other bows is because the Cernos Prime had the longest reload time out of all of them. And it was actually kind of annoying, especially if you switch to the Cernos after using another bow. Then the biggest change of them all is you can now fire the arrows either horizontally or vertically, and you switch between the two modes by pressing the secondary fire button, and the bow has also received an innate 50% extra damage on a headshot. And when it comes to the build, I personally went for a crit build with hunter munitions and loads of multi-shot, though since they did buff the status, you could just go for dual stat mods and go for a status build instead. And that's it, those are all the bow changes that were introduced with update 22.12, so I thank you very much for watching. As always guys, I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.